Before we begin, I need you to make one commitment, not to me, to yourself. Stay until habit number 6, because habit number 6 is not a financial tip. It is not a budgeting strategy. It is not something you will find in any personal finance book or investment course. Habit number 6 is the specific psychological practice that separates men who quietly build lasting wealth from men who earn significant money and still end up with nothing to show for it. Most people will watch this video, absorb the first few habits, and leave before reaching the one that would have actually changed something permanent in them. Do not be that person. Stay until 6. Everything before it is the foundation. 6 is the shift. I will see you there. There is a kind of wealth that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a dramatic moment everyone around you can point to. No sudden breakthrough, no public celebration, just quiet decisions. Repeated long enough to become destiny. The men who build this kind of wealth do not talk about it while they are building it. They do not post about it. They do not perform it. They simply practice 7 habits, consistently, privately, and without interruption, until compounding does what compounding always does when given enough time and enough disciplined human behavior to work with. Quietly. And most men never notice this is happening, not because it is hidden, because they are too busy looking for something louder. Let me be clear. None of this works if you are still trying to look wealthy instead of becoming wealthy. In that one distinction between performing wealth and building it is where everything in this video begins. These habits are not difficult to understand. They are difficult to practice, not because they require exceptional resources or exceptional circumstances, but because every single one of them requires you to consistently choose what your financial future needs over what your present emotional state wants. That specific discipline, choosing the future over the present in small moments repeatedly without applause, is the rarest financial skill a man can develop. Pay attention. This is where the difference quietly begins. Habit number 1. Pay yourself first. The quietly wealthy man decides what percentage of every dollar he earns belongs to his future before he decides what belongs to his present. Not after bills are paid, not after the lifestyle is funded, not from whatever remains at the end of the month. Before. Most men never notice how much this single word changes everything. Before. Most men operate on a consumption-first model. Income arrives, expenses are covered, lifestyle is maintained. Whatever remains is available for saving. The quietly wealthy man operates on a capital-first model. Income arrives. A predetermined percentage moves immediately to wealth building before a single consumption decision is made. The lifestyle is funded from what remains after that allocation, not before it. And this is where most men unknowingly sabotage themselves. They believe saving is something that happens after living. The quietly wealthy man knows that saving is what makes real living possible. The percentage matters less than the consistency. Even 10% of every dollar, moved automatically and consistently before a single expense is addressed, compounds into something significant over a long enough timeline. Now, here's exactly how you put this into practice. Open a separate bank account today, label it clearly, Future Capital. Set up an automatic transfer that moves a fixed percentage of every income payment into that account on the same day the income arrives, not the day after, not at the end of the month. The same day. Remove that account from your daily banking view if your platform allows it. Out of sight, out of reach, out of the emotional decision-making process that would otherwise find a reason to spend it. Start with whatever percentage is honest for your current situation. The discipline of consistency matters infinitely more than the size of the percentage. Once the habit is automatic, once the money is moving before you have the chance to redirect it, increase the percentage gradually every 3 months. This is not a savings strategy. It is an identity declaration. The declaration that your future has financial priority over your present comfort. And that declaration, made once and then automated so it never depends on your willpower again, is the foundation that every other habit in this video is built upon. Without it, the remaining 6 are techniques without a home. With it, everything that follows has somewhere to land and something to compound on top of. But putting money aside is only the beginning, because the second habit determines whether that money actually grows or simply sits there while inflation quietly consumes it. And most men are making a specific mistake around this that costs them years of compounding they will never get back. Habit number 2, invest in your financial education before you invest your money. The quietly wealthy man treats financial knowledge as a non-negotiable ongoing investment, not a one-time event, not a completed chapter, a permanent practice. Most men treat financial education as something they do once and then consider finished. They read one book, watch one video series, take one course, then operate from that fixed body of knowledge indefinitely, applying outdated understanding to current decisions and wondering why the results never match the expectations. Very few people understand what I am about to explain. The compounding of financial knowledge is as real and as powerful as the compounding of financial capital. A man who is simultaneously growing his understanding of money and his accumulation of money is operating at a level the man who stopped learning cannot compete with, regardless of their relative starting points. And this is where most men unknowingly limit themselves. They invest money they do not fully understand into instruments they cannot properly evaluate, and then attribute the poor results to bad luck rather than to the knowledge gap that was always the actual problem. Here is exactly how you put this into practice. Allocate 30 minutes every single day to financial education. Not occasionally, not when you feel like it. Every day. You could treat it with the same non-negotiable consistency you would give to a meeting with your most important client. Read one serious book on money, investing, or financial psychology every month. Follow 2 or 3 genuinely knowledgeable financial voices whose thinking challenges and expands yours rather than simply confirming what you already believe. Once per quarter, review your financial decisions from the previous 3 months, not to judge yourself, but to identify specifically where better knowledge would have produced a better decision. That quarterly review is where your financial education converts directly into improved financial behavior. Because the goal is not to accumulate financial knowledge. The goal is to make better decisions with the knowledge you are accumulating. And a man who is consistently making better financial decisions than he was making 12 months ago is a man whose financial trajectory is improving continuously, regardless of what the market is doing, regardless of what the economy is doing, and regardless of what the people around him are doing. 2 habits down, both quiet, both invisible, both practiced by men building something significant without the noise most people associate with financial ambition. The third habit is perhaps the most psychologically confronting of all 7, because it requires you to do something your social environment has been actively discouraging your entire adult life. Once you hear it, you will immediately recognize every time you have failed to practice it, and exactly what that failure has cost you. Before we go into the remaining 5 habits, if what you have just heard has already shifted something in how you think about money and discipline, do 2 things right now. Like this video, not as a gesture, as a personal signal to yourself that this is the kind of thinking you are committing to. And subscribe to Beast Mind Psychology. Because what we are building here is not a collection of financial tips. It is a complete psychological framework for becoming the kind of man whose financial results cannot be explained by his circumstances. If that is the man you are committed to becoming, subscribe now and stay with me for all 7 habits. Because what is coming will permanently change how you see your relationship with money. Habit number 3, spend intentionally, not socially. The quietly wealthy man spends less than his income allows, consistently, privately, without apology. Most men miss this, not because the idea is complex, because they underestimate what it actually requires in practice. Spending less than your income allows is not a mathematical challenge. It is a psychological and social one. Your income level does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in a social context with specific, largely unspoken expectations about the lifestyle standard a man at your income level should be maintaining, the car he should drive, the neighborhood he should live in, the restaurants he should frequent, the clothing he should wear, And for most men, the psychological pressure of those expectations produces spending behavior calibrated to meet social standards rather than to serve financial architecture. And this is where most men unknowingly destroy their own wealth building. Not through ignorance, through performance. The quietly wealthy man has made a specific internal decision. His spending is not a social communication. It is a private financial tool, used deliberately, strategically, and without the interference of what other people's perception of his consumption communicates about his status. He is genuinely comfortable living below the visible ceiling of his income, not because he is depriving himself of things he values, but because he has done the internal work of separating what he genuinely values from what he has been socially conditioned to perform. Here is exactly how you put this into practice. Write down every recurring expense in your life right now, every single one. Now, next to each expense, write one word: value or performance. Value means this expense serves something you genuinely prioritize. Performance means this expense exists primarily to communicate something to the people around you. Be ruthless with your honesty here, because the gap between those two categories, the money currently going to performance that could be redirected to your future capital account, is your immediate wealth building acceleration fund. It is already in your possession. It is simply currently being directed toward an audience that is not contributing to your financial future. Redirect it, quietly, without announcement, without explanation, and without the need for a single person around you to understand or validate the decision you have made. Because the quietly wealthy man has never needed that validation. And the fourth habit shows you exactly what he does instead, with both his risk and his capital, that most men are either too fearful or too reckless to replicate. Habit number 4, take calculated risks, never reckless ones. The quietly wealthy man takes deliberate calculated risks early and often, but never risks what he cannot afford to lose at his current stage of building. Most men relate to financial risk in one of two dysfunctional ways. Either they avoid it almost entirely, keeping capital in the safest instruments, missing compounding opportunities that only risk-tolerant positions can access, gradually falling behind inflation while believing they are being responsible. Or they take undisciplined risks, moved by excitement, social pressure, one or the fear of missing out, without genuine understanding of the realistic downside scenario. The quietly wealthy man does neither, and this is where most men unknowingly cross a line they do not see. He takes risk deliberately, with full understanding of both the upside potential and the realistic downside, with capital specifically allocated for risk-taking, not with capital that belongs to his financial foundation. Risking your financial foundation is not risk-taking, it is gambling. The difference between calculated risk and gambling is not the outcome. It is the clarity and discipline of the process that preceded the decision. Here is exactly how you put this into practice. Divide your investable capital into two clearly separated categories. One of the first categories is your foundation capital, the money that represents your security, your stability, and your ability to continue building regardless of what happens to any single investment. This capital is never exposed to high risk, never. The second category is your growth capital, a specific percentage of your total investable assets that you have consciously decided you can afford to lose entirely without structural damage to your financial foundation. This is the capital you deploy into higher risk, higher reward positions. Before committing any growth capital to any opportunity, answer 3 questions in writing. What is the realistic worst-case outcome of this decision? Can I absorb that outcome without damage to my foundation capital? Do I have a specific exit strategy if the position moves against me? If you cannot answer all 3 questions clearly and in writing, you are not ready to make that investment. Wait until you can, because the quietly wealthy man does not avoid risk. He simply refuses to make financial decisions he has not fully thought through. And that discipline, the discipline of the written pre-decision process, is what separates calculated risk from the undisciplined gamble that most men call investing. The 5th habit reveals what the quietly wealthy man does with something most men treat as an afterthought, something they give away freely every single day without ever calculating what it is actually worth. And once you understand how he manages it, you will never look at your daily schedule the same way again. Habit number 5, treat your time like money because it is worth more. The quietly wealthy man treats his time as a financial instrument. He manages it with the same deliberateness that he manages his capital. Most men have a relatively clear relationship with their money, but an almost completely unconscious relationship with their time. They spend it reactively, responding to whatever demands the environment places on it, without ever calculating what an hour of their time is actually worth, without ever auditing where their hours are going and what those hours are returning. Pay attention here. Most men never notice this distinction, and it is costing them more than any single bad investment ever could. Time, unlike money, cannot be earned back. Every hour spent on low-value activity is a unit of irreplaceable financial potential permanently consumed, quietly lost, and never recovered. Like, here is exactly how you put this into practice. Calculate your current hourly value. Take your monthly income and divide it by the number of hours you work each month. That number is your current baseline hourly rate. Now audit your last 7 days. Write down every activity that consumed more than 30 minutes of your time. Next to each activity, write what it produced, financially, relationally, or in terms of genuine personal development. Now identify the activities that produced nothing of measurable value. Those activities are not free. They cost you your hourly rate multiplied by the time they consumed. Make a decision, right now, about which of those activities you will eliminate, reduce, or delegate within the next 30 days. Mono will then protect your peak cognitive hours, the hours of the day when your mental clarity and creative capacity are at their highest, for your highest value work exclusively. Guard those hours with the same intensity you guard your foundation capital, because a man who treats his hours with the same respect he treats his dollars will always outperform a man who manages his money carefully and his time carelessly. We are approaching habit number 6, the one I told you not to miss, the one that is not in any personal finance book, the one the quietly wealthy practice consistently while the men around them focus on strategies, returns, and income levels. Very few people understand what I am about to explain. Receive this not as a financial tip, but as a psychological principle, because that is exactly what it is. Habit number 6, sit with your financial reality, clearly, honestly, and without distortion. The quietly wealthy man regularly and deliberately examines his financial reality without distortion in either direction. Not with optimism that inflates what is working, not with anxiety that catastrophizes what is not. With clear, honest, emotionally neutral assessment of exactly where he is, exactly what is working, exactly what is not, and exactly what his next most important action is. This sounds simple. It is not, because most men's relationship with their financial reality is mediated by emotion in ways they rarely acknowledge. When things are going well, emotional inflation produces overconfidence, undisciplined risk, lifestyle expansion that outpaces wealth building, the quiet abandonment of the habits that produce the progress in the first place. And this is where most men unknowingly destroy the momentum they spent years building. When things are not going well, financial anxiety produces avoidance, the reluctance to look clearly at the numbers, the resistance to confronting what is not working, the psychological defense mechanisms that make honest self-assessment feel more threatening than the financial reality it is designed to address. The quietly wealthy man has trained himself to sit with his financial reality regularly, in a state of genuine emotional neutrality. Not performed neutrality, genuine neutrality. Here is exactly how you put this into practice. Schedule one fixed hour every week, the same day, the same time, without exception, that you call your financial reality hour. During this hour, you do 4 things in sequence. First, review your numbers completely and without emotional interpretation. Income, expenses, savings rate, investment performance, debt position. Just the numbers, no story attached to them yet. Second, identify what moved in the right direction this week and specifically why it moved. Third, identify what did not move in the right direction this week and specifically why it did not. Fourth, Write down the single most important financial action you will take in the coming week based on what the numbers are honestly telling you. One action, not 10, one. The man who consistently takes one clear, financially aligned action per week, determined by honest assessment rather than emotional reaction, is making 52 financially aligned decisions per year. Compounded over 5 years, that is 260 deliberate wealth-building decisions made from a foundation of clarity rather than emotion. That is not a financial strategy. That is a psychological advantage that most men will never develop because they are too uncomfortable to look at their numbers honestly. And the quietly wealthy man has long since made peace with the discomfort of clarity. This is the habit that makes all other habits sustainable. A man who can do this, in any financial condition, at any stage of his building process, is a man whose wealth building cannot be permanently derailed, only temporarily interrupted. Quietly, one habit remains. And it is the habit that determines whether everything you have built survives long enough to compound into something that changes your life permanently. Most men stop before they reach it. Do not be one of them. Habit number 7, never stop. The quietly wealthy man never stops. Not when progress is slower than expected. Not when an external event disrupts the trajectory. Not when an investment does not perform the way the analysis suggested. Not when the people around him cannot see or validate what he is building. Not when the timeline extends beyond the original plan. Not when the sacrifice required feels disproportionate to the visible results so far. He never stops, not from a stubbornness, not from inability to adapt, but from the deep, settled understanding that compounding requires time above all other resources, and that every interruption to the compounding process resets a portion of what had already been built and extends the timeline by more than the interruption itself consumed. Most men never understand this until it is too late. The man who practices 6 powerful habits for 3 years and stops for 1 year has not lost 1 year of progress. He has lost a compounding trajectory that was 3 years into its most powerful phase. The man who practices 7 quieter, more sustainable habits without interruption for the same 4 years has built something the inconsistent man's sprint cannot match. Because consistency over time is worth more than intensity without continuity. Understand this clearly. What I here is exactly how you put this into practice. Build what the quietly wealthy man calls a continuity system, a set of minimum, non-negotiable financial behaviors that you maintain regardless of circumstance, regardless of how you feel, and regardless of what the external environment is doing. Your continuity system should contain no more than 3 behaviors. They should be simple enough to maintain even in your most difficult weeks. They should be specific enough that you know with absolute certainty whether you have done them or not. For example, your continuity system might be: automatic transfer to future capital happens on payday without exception. 30 minutes of financial education happens every day without exception. Financial reality hour happens every week without exception. 3 behaviors. Simple, non-negotiable. Maintained regardless of what else is happening in your life. Because the quietly wealthy man understands something most men never fully internalize. You do not need to be performing at your peak every week to build wealth. You need to be consistent at your minimum every week without interruption. Peak performance is intermittent. Consistency is permanent. And permanent consistency is the only thing that compounding actually requires to do its work. The 7th habit is therefore not really a habit in the conventional sense. It is an identity. It is the decision made once at a specific internal moment and reaffirmed daily in the small behavioral choices that either honor or abandon it. That this is who you are now. A man who builds, a man who practices, a man who does not stop when the results are invisible, when the timeline is long, when the sacrifice is real, and when the applause is absent. Because the quietly wealthy man has never needed the applause. He has always known what he was building, and he has always known that the building itself, the daily discipline of it, the quiet dignity of it, the patient power of it, is its own reward long before the financial results confirm what the psychology already knew. 7 habits, all quiet, all consistent, all practiced by men building something significant without the noise, the performance, and the social validation that most people have been conditioned to believe wealth building requires. The noise is not the building. The performance is not the wealth. The validation is not the result. The habits are, the consistency is, the identity is. When the identity begins with a single decision made right now before this video ends about what kind of man you are going to be in your relationship with money from this point forward. Not tomorrow, not after the next paycheck, not after the circumstances improve or the timing feels right. Now, because the man who waits for the perfect conditions to begin building has already made his most expensive financial decision, and it was the decision not to begin. The question is no longer whether wealth is possible for you. The question is whether you are willing to become the man who can hold it. Before you go, I have two questions. I want honest answers in the comments. First, which of the 7 habits is most absent from your current financial behavior right now? Not which one you intend to develop. Which one is genuinely missing today? Drop the number, 1 through 7, just the number, because naming it is the first act of the man who is about to change it. Second, of the 7 practical implementation steps you received today, which one are you going to put into action before this weekend? Tell me in the comments. Not because I am asking you to perform accountability publicly, but because the act of committing to a specific action in writing, even in a comment section, increases the psychological probability of that action being taken by a significant margin. Write it down, because that written commitment is the first behavioral evidence of the man you are becoming. If this video gave you something real, not a tip, not a trick, not a shortcut, but a genuine shift in how you understand the psychology of quiet wealth building, like this video, you're like signals to this channel that this level of psychological depth is exactly what you came here for. And if you are committed to building not just financial knowledge, but the specific psychological identity that makes financial success inevitable, subscribe to Beast Mind Psychology, because every week on this channel we go deeper into the psychology of men who build, men who lead, men who develop the internal architecture that produces external results. The people around them cannot fully explain. That is the community you are joining. Men who are quietly, consistently, and without interruption building something significant. That is exactly where you belong. The work starts now. I love you, brother, and I'll see you in the next one.